You have to delegate if you want to grow pretty much at all. But if you've tried it and it hasn't worked, you can say what we say, which is delegation is hard, but it is necessary. And my guest today can attest to all of this, and she's going to offer us her insights on how she got over it. I'm Carl White, principal at Mark Advisory Group, which is a healthcare marketing agency, and I'm also the host of PracticeCare. But the mission for both is the same, and that's to help private practice owners stay private. That's really what they want. And we just believe that care is better when it's you and your provider sitting at the table trying to figure out what's best for you, and no one else is there also secretly whispering in your provider's ear what their own agenda is, whether it's a hospital, a health system, owners in faraway lands, whoever they may be. They're not telling you what they think. It's just you and your provider, and that's the best. And today, my guest is Dr. Candace Creasman Mowry. She is a licensed clinical mental health counselor supervisor in North Carolina. And she opened Creasman Counseling in 2011 and now has a multidisciplinary staff of 13 providers. Her group emphasizes equity, access, and addressing mental health concerns disproportionately impacting individuals from marginalized groups. Dr. Creasman Mowry also runs a clinical mental health counseling internship program and teaches mindfulness meditation to international audiences. You've got a lot going on there. Clearly, thank you for carving out some time to come on PracticeCare.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And let's start where I start with most guests, which is give us fill in a bit more of your background, help us get to know you a bit better than what a brief bio can do. I'm curious about your focus on marginalized groups, how you kind of got there. It just sounds like a neat story.
Yeah, that's such an interesting question. So I would say that my interest in marginalized groups, at least a portion of it, comes from being a part of a couple.
Okay.
So just as a woman, the experiences that I've had, trying to get good health care, the inequities that I've personally experienced. Also, as someone who has needed mental health care,
Okay.
and have run into some of the barriers that are associated with getting that care. I would say that the interest kind of moved beyond me and into other marginalized groups, such as, working with people of color, LGBTQ plus community members.
Okay.
That really started, I think, as a function of my doctoral program, because I had a great teacher for my multicultural class, and the class itself really pointed to how many gaps there are in the services that are available, how many barriers there are that are just, amplified and ongoing within the systems where people are trying to get good help. So it just really kind of became what felt like a necessary part of my personal development and even my spiritual development, to really see what I could do to help bridge those gaps.
Got it. And I will not claim to have my finger on the pulse of any of those groups, but you see something every once in a while and you go, and I just say, really? Still? Really?
Yeah, still.
And I'm sadly no longer surprised, but still kind of shocked. And different topic for another day. So in order for you to do this, you've got to have a sort of a successful practice. You topic is delegation. Eventually you can't do it all yourself. And so I want to kind of get into that. When did it start to hit you? You just couldn't keep going with doing so much of it yourself, all of it yourself. If you could give us kind of maybe a day in the life of what that looked like, where you, I don't know, at the end of the day, you're like, oh my God, what? I can't keep. But, help us out with that. Give us a flavor.
Sure. I think it was probably 2017. So I had really just started growing the practice beyond myself. So
Okay.
I started with adding a couple of supervisees, and so felt confident about being able to sort of manage people. And so at that point in 2017, I had, I want to say, 4 people on my staff, and was looking at adding a couple of more counselors.
These were counselors. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so just counselors at that point. And I was sitting in the YMCA lobby because I could get 2 hours of free childcare if I was sitting in the lobby. And I would basically, you're supposed to use that to work out. I was using it to do payroll. And I realized this is ridiculous.
Yeah.
And so I was frantic. I realized I was not going to finish payroll before my 2-hour childcare was up. And yeah, just realized that I had just been holding on so tightly to control
Hmm.
from a place of fear, largely.
Okay.
And that was really kind of an aha moment that, there are people you could get to help you with some of these things.
So how long were you doing payroll in the YMCA lobby before that aha moment day happened?
A year, a good
A
year.
year. So what do you
Yeah.
think? It's not the most easy answer question. Was there something about that particular day, or was it a slow build and it just boiled over, or what?
I am really great at compartmentalizing and suppressing. Uh, so for me, it's in retrospect, it's a slow build, but in the moment, it's like it hits like a ton of bricks. And yeah, I mean, I was just stressed to death,
Hmm.
I mean, my heart rate was constantly elevated, constant muscle tension, and just something about all of these pieces coming together. It was just impossible to ignore what an impact it was having on me to sort of try to maintain all of these roles without any help.
Yeah. And it's funny, I meet more and more people who do their own payroll, and I just say to myself, I don't know why you would ever want. I don't even want to touch it. It's 2 clicks and you're done, and I'd break it. I'd break it. Spend a lot more time trying to fix it. Yeah. What are some of the other things that you were doing at the time? So payroll was the moment, but what were some of the other tasks and things that you were doing at the time that you don't do now?
Literally everything, because at that point I had zero admin support.
Ah,
And I had not yet realized that I had to back off of my own caseload in order to add these other tasks. So I was handling um, intakes in terms of assigning new clients to new clinicians. I was handling their credentialing with insurance, payroll, as we mentioned, the website. I was doing the website. Really anything related to the practice was me.
wow. Wow. And I know what some of those involve, or I've been told, and they're not quick and easy, that's for sure. That's for sure. So what did you delegate? Well, I jumped ahead. Let me come back. So the moment sort of burst for you, delegation, the flash reaction is it's risky. Nobody could do it as well as me. These are all moments, nobody says these things, but that's the feeling behind it. Don't let go. It's too hard to delegate. How'd you get over that?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. I mean, honestly, I think just in the same way that most change
What have I
happens.
got to lose, right? If the
Yeah, it's like the
YMCA changes their
pain,
policy tomorrow, I'm screwed. So,
right? Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the pain of staying in what I was doing felt worse than the idea of making some changes. It just so it felt worth the risk. But that didn't mean that the anxiety around the risk went away at all. It
Right.
just felt more necessary.
Right. Did you say to yourself in that moment, I can always take it back if I don't like what's going? I wonder, did that maybe
That's
help you
almost
try to?
always a part of my internal dialogue is like, where is my out?
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
always have an out.
Yeah. So you got over it by saying, I just, this pain is too great. I can't
Yeah.
imagine the pain of delegating being any worse. What have I got to lose?
Yes.
How much worse could it get? Yeah. Okay. So what'd you delegate first? What was your kind of dipping the toe in the water? Or did you just
So
jump in the deep end? Did you just here you go?
Oh no, I did not jump in the deep end. I definitely was very gradual. So I took some cues from other like business, probably blogs, and it was, kind of thought through what would make kind of a reasonable job description for an admin person. So what sort of tasks make sense
Mm-hmm.
for the person who might be coming on. But then I also really just had to gauge what felt within my personal zone of proximal development, basically. So, like, if my comfort zone really wasn't comfortable anymore, but was familiar, and then I knew I couldn't just hand it all off because that would just put me in a state of constant panic,
Mm-hmm.
then there's this space between those 2 points where it felt like, okay, this is still going to be anxiety provoking, but that's manageable
Mm-hmm.
anxiety. And those things really fell into like scheduling. So having an administrative person who would handle client referrals and help connect them to new clients, and also checking benefits. So
Mm,
insurance benefits, because that's something that even if someone were to do it wrong, the claims tell the truth, and they tell the real story once they've been paid or not paid. So even if someone was kind of struggling to adjust to that task,
hmm.
it kind of comes out in the wash.
So you find out if they did it right or wrong eventually anyway.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's interesting. So is kind of verification of the job done? I guess that sounds like it's an important thing to you. That would be important to anybody, right? You've got to, you know, balance keeping your finger on the pulse without, I guess, being a micromanager, but
Yes.
that's a big
Yeah.
deal to
That
you.
was
Yeah.
really a priority for me, was having some way to know that the tasks were getting done, that they were being done well, and that they were
Hmm.
being done well in the context of the group. So not just
Hmm.
according to my standards, but that the other counselors also felt supported
Hmm.
by the work that the admin person was doing.
Right. So how do you approach that? Because I started delegating stuff a couple of years ago. I was similar story. I don't know that the pain ever got there, but it's funny. Things slowed down for me a bit in COVID. And what am I going to do with myself? So you know what? Let's do this. Let me start delegating some things that I just don't need to be doing for, we can talk about the reasons. But, part of it was, how am I going to know if the job got done? What kind of systems? How am I going to, because it's a virtual assistant. She's in another part of the country.
Mm-hmm.
I know what she looks like because we zoomed a couple times, but I couldn't micromanage this person even if I wanted to, and I don't. So, how do you set up how are you going to keep your finger on the pulse without micromanaging?
Yeah, it's definitely changed now, largely as a function of the practice is bigger.
Hmm.
And so now just my conceptualization and the reality of what my delegation administrative staff kind of looks like is very different from where I started. So initially it was, who is willing to work like 5 hours, and can I throw a handful of things at them and just kind of hope and see how it goes. So it was much more tentative.
Hmm.
Now the delegation is just really a built-in part of how the practice works. So I know now that it would not be successful if I were to walk back any of those delegated pieces.
Hmm.
Um, so what I find that helps me to feel like everything is getting done is, one, I have regular meetings
Okay.
with my admin staff, and I try to find some balance in those. First, they're brief. I don't
Hmm.
want people to be like, this could have been an email ever about a meeting.
Mm.
um, so that's really a standard. And I try to balance in the meeting both like accountability to specific tasks. So tell me where we are on these things, as well as finding people's growth edge in a way. So,
What do you
how
mean?
is this? So, like,
Like a
how
growth
is
edge? It's a neat term.
work?
What is that? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in this case, it can mean a lot of different things, but for me, it's like, how is this work fitting in with your life? Is the work-life balance happening for you?
Hmm.
And then are you stimulated enough? Like, are you getting your needs met, not just in terms of I'm getting a paycheck, but
Hmm.
do you feel like the needs that you can get met at work? Because I think we really try to get way too many needs met through work, period. But um,
Interesting.
is
Yeah.
that happening? So that way folks hopefully, for one, feel supported in the work they have to do
Hmm.
as a function of the role, but also have a sense that like growth can still happen and development can still happen within their role.
Hmm. Hmm. Okay. Um, so brief meetings, trying to find fulfillment, kind of that's how you keep your finger on the pulse.
Hmm.
Okay. Um, so how do you decide today what you're going to keep versus what you're going to delegate? Like, what is your role? So we know what it used to look like. You did everything. We can all fill in the blank on that one. What does it look like today? What's a day in the life for a week in the life for you today?
Oh gosh, it's still pretty all over the place, but
Well, yeah.
feel like it's more a function of choice now than of necessity. So,
Hmm.
so I definitely am stimulated by having a lot of different types of things to do. So I get
Hmm.
bored if I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. So,
Hmm.
so I still have a lot of different things to do. But I would say that for one, my anxiety around delegating is less. Um, which I think for one is just a function of exposure. Like the more you do it, the easier it gets. But
I was
two,
going to
it's also
ask,
a
what do you
function.
think?
Yeah, I think it's also a function of getting good people.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so that has probably been as much a part of the process as figuring out what to delegate, is
Mm-hmm.
figuring out, is really kind of trusting my own intuition around hiring decisions.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, I mean, I just lean real heavily on people that I either have already had an established relationship with, or someone I know and trust has had an established
Mm-hmm.
relationship with.
Okay.
So that helps a lot.
When you look back on, this is a question we didn't talk about beforehand, but I feel like it's a pretty easy one. When you look back, so your way of delegating now, your way of building the practice now is obviously different than it was back in the YMCA day. We'll call it that.
Sure.
Is there one or two things that you wish you knew then that you know now, that you would tell
Mm,
your day one self? You've got more experience now. You had the benefit of hindsight, I guess,
yeah.
or foresight if you go back then.
Yeah. I mean, I think honestly, the trusting your gut and trusting your instinct piece was something that was much more of a struggle initially, because
Mm-hmm.
I think and a lot of that has to do with some of my own identities, right? So I grew up, somewhat economically under-resourced, we'll say,
Okay. Okay.
with family, who, I mean, several family members who were entrepreneurs.
Mm.
And their model was that you scrape by, you work late hours, you do it yourself. It was just this very kind of rugged individualism approach. And that is very much what I brought to starting the practice. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's what I brought to starting to delegate. So I think what I would want my earlier YMCA self to know is that one, you don't have to go it alone, but two, I mean, it's just this notion that effort equals results as being like a direct, those are the only two factors, is just not realistic. There's just so much that is out of our control,
Mm-hmm.
especially when it comes to business, that to pour all of your effort and energy into trying to mitigate every single outcome just as a function of what you can see and what you can do, it's just a waste.
Yeah.
So honestly,
Yeah.
I wish I could have told, and I wish that YMCA version of me would have believed
Well,
that
there's that. Yeah.
you could just go with the flow more,
Yeah. Yeah.
because there are going to be ups and downs regardless of how effective you are.
Yeah. Boy, it's so true on the effort equals success, I guess. I guess that's true if you're paid an ungodly amount of money per hour or something like
Maybe,
that,
yeah.
but that's extremely rare, obviously. Um, So very insightful, good stuff. I really wanted to hit on with this. There's the mechanical, how do you delegate? But that's the easier of the two. I think the more interesting one is just the inside yourself. How do you get over it? Give it a try, and then
Hmm.
how do you pull it back if you don't? And that's I think what's been really interesting for me today. I am earlier on my delegation journey than you are, but nevertheless, I think it's good for people to hear. A couple of wrap up questions. First one is there anything you think I should have asked you, but just didn't think to ask you that people on this topic, people would benefit from hearing?
Mm, I think you asked it, and I don't think I answered it with this piece that I think is important, is sort of like, the actual how of
Yeah.
delegating. And I would say that, a recognition of, it is still going to be anxiety provoking
Mm-hmm.
to delegate, even if it's a good idea. So like, not delegating from like a mood dependent kind of place, like waiting for it to feel good or feel right to do it.
Mm.
Um, but the other piece of that is that we really just have to have a lot of compassion for ourselves. And I think that is something that a lot of business owners, and certainly a lot of clinicians, really struggle with. We give all of our good stuff, our compassion and unconditional positive regard to our clients, and may not have much for ourselves.
Hmm.
Um, so really, I mean, anytime you're trying to take a big step out of your comfort zone, the easiest way to do that is by being gentle with yourself.
Yeah. Um, it's funny you say comfort zone. So I had a guest on recently, and I asked him. He's like this motivational coach. There's a lot more behind it, but that's the heart of what he does. And I said, comfort zone came up, and he said, Carl, comfort zone is where dreams go to die. I thought,
Oh, yes.
isn't that nice?
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, it's, and in this context, if your dream is to be a larger practice or a larger business than you are today, eventually you're going to need some help doing it. So absolutely. The other wrap-up question I ask is, if we take a step back from what we're talking about, we've caught somebody's attention, they're in pain, let's say, for whatever, they've got their own version of what you went through. What are the one or two tangible steps you would offer them so that they could get going down the path right now?
Yeah. I mean, I would say the thing that has been helpful for me historically and continues to be really helpful is that whenever I'm thinking about making a change and I've got that anxiety and that tension around it, is rather than to just immediately go into trying to talk myself up and, just do
Mm-hmm.
it, is I go directly to the fear. So I find it really helpful to list, what is it that I am afraid of if
Mm-hmm.
I make this choice? So if I delegate this task, so if I delegate payroll, obviously I'm afraid it's going to be done wrong and I'm not going to have the money to cover it. And, someone's going
Mm-hmm.
to be, generally it's about well-being for me. Someone is going to be in a bad spot if this is done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we write down our fears, we have this opportunity to get in touch with the aspect of our fear that's really our own conditioning
Mm-hmm.
rather than what is the reality of what may or may not happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where we get to be compassionate with ourselves. We can say, oh, yeah, of course I'm freaked out that there won't be enough to cover it because, like, I'm used to scarcity.
Mm-hmm.
So that doesn't mean it's the truth of what will happen, but it is absolutely my emotional truth. And so I got to be real with myself and kind with myself. And then I can also build structures that support that fear, that
Mm-hmm.
prevent that fear from coming to fruition.
Yeah. So list out your fears, and
Yeah.
yeah, and then ask yourself, all right, how likely would that actually happen? And
How
if it
likely
did,
would it be?
and if it did, would it sink the ship, or could I figure it out? And if it's
Yeah.
not that likely and it wouldn't sink, go, go, go.
Yeah.
You can always stop. Yeah. The I'll add another one is, after you list your fears, good tasks to delegate are like the repeatable ones. Things that you have to
Mm-hmm.
do regularly, because you can train somebody to do that. One-off projects and one-off things, they're harder. They're not impossible. But like you mentioned, insurance verification, every new client needs their insurance verified. So somebody can repeat that and get good at it after a while. And
Mm-hmm.
payroll's another one. There's all sorts of repeatable stuff that's got to happen in anybody's practice that, man, if you're doing it today, the pain you feel is not going to get lesser. It's going to get
Yeah.
worse. If you're at all good at what you do, you're going to get more patients. You're still doing this on top of it, the pain's getting worse. So,
I love that you mentioned the repeatable task because I think another thing that I had to do was to kind of get over myself, because like those repeatable tasks, I didn't invent them
yeah.
and I'm not the only person capable of doing them.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
acknowledging that there are competent people in the world who can handle those things.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, cool. Well, Candice, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it. You got a lot going on. Once again, Candace Creasman Mowry is a clinical mental health counselor in North Carolina. We're going to put all your contact information that you supplied in the show notes for this episode, so that if anybody wants to reach out, pick your brain a bit more, they can do so. And a couple of other points before we wrap up. You're someone like Candice who has experience on the business side of the practice because you're living it and you think others would benefit from something that you've learned. We want you to come on PracticeCare. At the same time, if you're someone like me who serves private practices, same deal. You got some advice to share, we'd like you to come on. In Candice's show notes and every episode show notes, there's a link, couple of questions, tell us what's on your mind so that we can get you scheduled as soon as possible. And finally, if you haven't done so yet, I want you to subscribe to PracticeCare. We're on Apple, we're on Spotify, we're on Google, Stitcher, all the major platforms. Wherever you listen to them, subscribe so you can get the new episodes every week. Thanks very much, and until next time.